Okay. Everything that you have learned to this point in dealing with the present tense is a tense that's really called the present indicative. And the present indicative is used to express facts, ask questions, and to express what is perceived reality. Perceived reality by the speaker. Now, perceived reality would be considered facts, but I think it's better to learn it as perceived reality. Now, as we did present tense indicative, going back all the way to Spanish 1010, you learned about the conjugations of verbs. And you learned that these verbs had specific conjugation endings that would allow you to change that verb and assign a subject to that verb based off of the ending of the verb. You kept the stem, which is everything but the AR, ER, or IR, and you just added a different ending. O, as, a, amos, ais, an, o, es, emos, es, is, en. And that was what you learned for the present indicative. And so you could take a simple verb like hablar, keep the stem, hablo, hablo, hablas, habla, hablamos, hablan. Fácil. With the present indicative, you learned some verbs that were irregular. And those verbs are extremely important for you to know for the subjunctive, which we're going to talk about today. So some of those verbs that were irregular were verbs like poner, hacer, tener, decir, venir, traer, conocer, valer, we'll put it up there. Valer, to be of worth. And I'm sure I'm missing one. Does anybody think of any others? Salir, did I do salir? Salir. Salir. Okay, and then besides these that were irregular in just the yo form, indicative, the first person singular is a better way to say it, you also had verbs like ir, ser, dar a little bit, that were just completely irregular. Star just a little bit as well. But I want to focus on these verbs right here, okay? These verbs that in the first person singular, present tense indicative, are irregular. You can remember what they are. So you tell me, what's the yo form of salir, present indicative? Salgo. Good. Poner. Pongo. Hacer. Hago. Tener. Tengo. Decir. Digo. Venir. Vengo. Traer. Traigo. Conocer. Conozco. Valer. You don't need to worry about that. That's to be worth, and that's valgo. So these verbs are all called, some people call them go verbs, right? I don't necessarily call them that, but some people do. I just did, so I guess I do. Okay, they all end in go. Okay, except for conocer. Again, this is the present tense indicative. It's used to state facts, to ask questions, and express what is your perceived reality. There is another tense that exists in Spanish for the present tense, and that tense is called the present tense subjunctive. El subjuntivo. Subjunctive. The present tense subjunctive. Now, the present tense subjunctive, the first thing that you need to learn about is what it's used for. So if this is used to express facts and questions, the present tense subjunctive is specifically used to express hopes, wishes, kind of like hopes, desires, and to express things that are not part of perceived reality. And in other words, it's used to express also things that haven't happened yet, and we are not sure that they're going to happen. We don't know for sure that they are going to happen. Unsure, I'm going to just put unsure, it will happen. That's a lot of grammatical explanation of the difference between the present indicative and the present tense subjunctive. But it's important for you, that those that really want to dig deep, to understand what the difference is. We're going to make it easier for you to understand all of this a little bit later. But the present tense subjunctive, you're going to have the same verbs, AR verbs, ER and IR verbs. And for the most part, all you have to do is change the ending of what was normally an indicative ER verb ending to an AR verb ending, and vice versa. So for example, the O is not going to be the same, but an AR verb will have the following endings: A, es, a, amos, en. ER verbs are going to have a, as, amos, and on. So as you can see, with the exception of the yo form, they've just switched endings. Present tense indicative and the present tense subjunctive. So if I were to tell you, here's the verb yo hablo in the indicative, if I just said conjugate the present tense, or the verb hablar in the first person singular present tense subjunctive, what would be the conjugation? Hable. Now, hable by itself, if you'll remember from 10:20, is a command, right? When you put that E ending on it, it's a command. A command is actually part of the subjunctive tense. That when you learn commands, which we'll learn more this chapter, that's part of the subjunctive tense. But that would be the conjugation of the verb, but that isn't how it's used in the subjunctive tense. So, the best way, going back to how to conjugate verbs in the subjunctive tense, the best rule for the verb conjugations is this: put the verb in the first person singular or yo form, present tense indicative, drop the O, and add the following. Okay? So the present tense subjunctive. The best way, again, I'm going to repeat it, to conjugate the verbs is put it in the yo form present tense, drop the O, and add this. This is why it's so important for you to know the yo form present tense of all of these verbs. Because the subjunctive formation of the verb salir is salga, salgas, salga, salgamos, salgan. The present tense subjunctive form of the verb hacer is aga, agas, aga, agamos, agan. It's all based off of that yo form present tense. When you deal with that, we're going to talk about some irregulars in a little bit, but when you do that, you take care of all of the issues. For example, one being, do I conjugate a stem changing verb as a stem changing verb in the subjunctive? And the answer is yes, unless it's like hacer and tener, tener and decir, which are stem changing in venir, which you base it off the yo form. But other verbs that are stem changing, like pensar, remember the yo form is pienso. So the subjunctive form of pensar is going to be piense, pienses, piense, pensemos, piense. So if you talk about just basing it off the yo form, then you include stem changing verbs, and you include these irregular verbs that are irregular in the first person singular, indicative. So you also will have these verbs that are irregular, ir and ser, and a few others, but we're just going to focus on ir and ser, because you just have to memorize how to conjugate them in the present tense, subjunctive. So the yo form subjunctive of the present tense subjunctive is vaya. Tú vayas. Él, ella, usted, vaya. Nosotros vayamos. Ellos, ellas, ustedes vayan. And the verb ser, sorry, that's ir. The verb ser is sea, seas, sea, seamos, and sean. Those are your verbs, the conjugations of those verbs in the present tense, subjunctive. Do you have any questions on how to form?
So I have a question about via. I always thought that, like in the command form, via was very offensive.
Not quite as offensive as other verbs. Vaya isn't so much offensive. And the command, it's not offensive. It's not. So if you were to say someone go to the store and buy something, you would say vaya in the usted form. Yeah, it's not offensive.
Okay.
If you said lárgate, that's not offensive. Like, that's like, get the hell out of here. That's how
It'd
you.
also be your toe.
Yeah.
If you scrutinize.
That's right. Yeah. Vaya, vete. Well, I could say vete more, right? Vete
Oh, yeah.
would be the one that was common. Okay. Any questions on this? Just formation. Right now, we're just worried about formation. Okay. So the reason why we're just worried about how to conjugate it is because there's a little bit of a difficulty. But the real difficulty comes in when am I expressing facts, questions, perceived reality versus when am I stating what is not part of perceived reality or expressing hopes, wishes, and desires. And so because of that, there's a couple things that we need to talk about. First, the subjunctive is used when a sentence has two clauses. So up until now, you've been talking in single clause sentences. And so the subjunctive is used when there's two clauses in a sentence, and it's usually separated by the word que. So one of the most common basic things that you can have with the subjunctive is this verb here, esperar que. Now, did you know qué quiere decir esperar en inglés?
Hope.
To hope. Okay. So here we have esperar que. Here's an example of the use of the subjunctive. Yo espero que, I hope that. Now, the next clause is going to have a change of subject. I hope that y'all, ustedes, study. These things. Yo espero que ustedes estudien estas cosas. Notice the verb is estudiar. It's an AR verb. In the present indicative, the AR verb would end in AN, but in this instance, it's going to end in EN because I have to use the subjunctive. The reason why I use the subjunctive is this twofold. For one, I've expressed a wish or a hope. And two, I have changed subjects between the que. Here's the subject in the first clause is I. The subject in the second clause is you all. So one of the things that's necessary for the subjunctive is a change of subject between the two clauses as well. This is important because this is an error that's made often in learning and practicing this stuff. If there is no change of subject, you don't use que, you just use the infinitive form of the verb. So for example, if I want to say, I want myself to study, then I would just say, yo espero estudiar. And I don't need the subjunctive because there is no change of subject there's only one clause. So, yo espero estudiar. So a lot of times when people are learning the subjunctive and practicing the subjunctive, they'll want to say, yo espero que estudie. Like, I hope that I study. That's incorrect. There has to be a change of subject. If there isn't, then you just use the infinitive form of the verb and keep the first verb in the indicative. Another pitfall that students have with the subjunctive is, I just lost it. What was I thinking about? Another pitfall that students have with the subjunctive. I can't remember it all of a sudden. Oh, it has to have, the first clause is indicative, the second clause is the subjunctive. So you have to use the subjunctive, and I'm going to choose a different one besides esperar que. I'm going to choose yo, what did you say? Deseo que, okay. Yo deseo que, I desire that, or I want that. You, and I'm going to say, I'm talking to my kids, and I'm going to say, I want you to clean the house. Yo deseo que tú limpies la cocina. So I'm talking to my child, I want you to clean the kitchen. Deseo que limpies la cocina. Now the verb you know is limpiar. In the indicative, it should have an S ending. However, we're going to have an ES ending because we have to use the subjunctive. Now this is what I was trying to say before that I lost my train of thought. This is indicative. This is subjunctive. The first clause is indicative. The second clause is subjunctive. A lot of times students will try to put both clauses in the subjunctive, which is incorrect when they're learning. So 2 clauses. Change the subject, and you're also expressing a hope, wish, desire.
Would you say it always follows that pattern of indicative,
Yes.
then subjunctive?
Yes.
Okay.
And you will almost always have a K. There is a few instances where you don't. I'll show you one of them, for example. Ojalá. Ojalá is a word that means hopefully. So sometimes you'll hear people say ojalá que, but sometimes the K is omitted. So you can say ojalá que tú pongas la mesa, hopefully you set the table, or you could just say ojalá pongas la mesa. So that's an instance where you might not hear que used with ojalá, but it means the same thing. Ojalá que tú pongas la mesa, ojalá pongas la mesa. Okay, both of them mean the same thing. Another one that's interesting, and this is kind of going ahead, I don't think it's mentioned in this chapter, is the word cuando. Cuando, remember what we talked about with the present subjunctive? Things that we're unsure are going to happen. You use the subjunctive. You're talking about something, but you don't know if it's going to happen. For example, if I say, cuando yo voy a la tienda, yo compro comida. Okay? Compro comida. When I go to the store, I buy food. That's describing something that happens. That is a statement. It's a fact. When I go to the store, I buy food. But if I said, when I go to the store later tonight, I'm going to buy food, then I would have to change that to cuando yo vaya a la tienda, voy, or you would say, voy a comprar comida. And the reason why is because I'm using cuando, but I'm talking about something that hasn't happened yet. Now that's more advanced. That's one of the last things that you'll probably learn about with the subjunctive tense. Okay, so we've talked about how to conjugate the verbs, and we've talked a little bit about how to express hopes, wishes, and desires. There's many instances, and here's the good news. You don't have time, especially when you're learning Spanish and thinking about Spanish and trying to speak Spanish. You don't have time to ask yourself, am I talking about facts or am I expressing something that's not part of perceived reality? As you're trying to communicate with this language, you don't have time to think that way. And so the best way to learn the subjunctive, in my humble opinion, is just memorize which clauses are subjunctive indicators, because you don't have time to think about the grammar behind it. So we already shared one with you today, and that's esperar que. Anytime you use esperar que and say, I hope that, Jimmy hopes that, we hope that, anybody hopes that, somebody else does something, that second clause would have to be in the subjunctive. Every time you use espero que, and then the subject changes, which it should, then you will use the subjunctive. Anytime you say ojalá que, We had that up on the board. Anytime you say that, and then the subject changes, or even there's no subject necessary, then you would use the subjunctive. So ojalá que is an indicator that the next clause would have to be in the subjunctive. Preferir que. I prefer that. Preferir que. I prefer that you go to McDonald's instead of Wendy's. The second clause, this would be yo prefiero que. The second clause would have to be in the subjunctive. So preferir que. And there's a whole list of possibilities of words. And it's not too complicated, but I have actually created for you a study Quizlet. So instead of learning this vocabulary that was easy, your vocabulary for this chapter is all of these things that are right here. So I'm going to show you really quickly how to log on to my Quizlet. So I created a Quizlet. I use it all the time, so if you go there, you're going to see all kinds of stuff, high school kids crap and stuff like that. But if you go to Quizlet, is everybody familiar with Quizlet? The username is Borup Spanish 2020. And the password is caps Spanish is, that's not capitalized, just the I, fun. Capital I, capital F. Capital S, capital I, capital F. And under that area, you'll see I've created a study guide for you to memorize all of these things. And we're obviously going to practice them more in class as well today, right now, soon. But I also have these all on your Canvas, under Pages. I just put it on there today. So on Canvas, under Pages, you will find the list of verbs if you would prefer to study it that way as well. Okay? But it's in both places. The one on Canvas doesn't have the answers. It just has the list of the verbs and the indicators, but not what they mean.